Hello and welcome into another episode of Unadvised here on the Sports Animal YouTube page, Facebook as well. I'm Preston Poole. That's Tyler Adams, Teabag. And we have a very special guest here with us this evening. We have Joe Mussatto of the Oklahoman. I was saying the other day, Joe, that if we did a like all media team for the nicest media members, you would probably be like the quarterback because you're awesome and we love you over at the Sports Animal.
Well, I appreciate that, and I always love coming on the Sports Animal, and I'll take being on the all nice team because if being the quarterback had anything to do with being athletic, I would not make the squad. But I'll try to keep being nice to everyone.
Perfect. Yeah, especially Gideon Hamilton, because I think you guys have a beef that goes back quite a while for some reason. I think that's a one-sided beef though.
That guy's pretty abrasive, he's hard to deal with, but good thing he's not on this.
Yes. All right. Well, I mean, let's get into it. My first question is simply, what the hell happened in Norman on Saturday?
Whew. Bad offense happened. It was pretty alarming, and I know that Brent Venables has talked about the injuries, and rightfully so. Offensive line, not only are they down guys, but guys are now playing out of position because of that. The receiver depth has been an issue since before the season started, and it's only got worse now. And you're working in a new quarterback with a new O-line and a new offensive coordinator. So all of this combination of factors is, I guess maybe we could have seen it coming, but even then, it's been worse than I thought it would be. The good news is OU's 2-0, but bad news is, they just played, two of the three worst teams on their schedule, and their offense, couldn't really move the ball.
Yeah, I heard Kerry Murdoch saying that he thinks it almost would have been just better off if they would have just gotten blown out like Oklahoma State did for South Alabama last year. That way you can just pinpoint all the blame on everything instead of just, just the offensive side of the ball. But getting into that, everyone's blaming injuries right now, or a lot of people are, pinpointing to injuries. Blame might be too harsh of a word, but they're pinpointing to injuries right now. And like that obviously I think has something to do to the extent of it. Brent Venables said in his press conference yesterday, ones are ones for a reason, twos are twos for a reason. How much stock are you putting into that though? Like if OU came out against Tulane, it's just by the grace of God was just fully healthy. How much do you think that changes the dynamic of their offense?
Well, I'm sure it changes things, and I'm sure it would look smoother, and especially with the young quarterback back there. If you've got it's not a veteran offensive line, but at least you would have kind of that group intact. I'm sure it would make things look smoother. But at the same time, Temple, I was looking at Bill Connolly's SP Plus rankings. Temple is the worst team in the FBS. And I know you scored 51 points, but the offense was handed the ball in great field position because of all the turnovers. And, they didn't really impose their will on Temple. Houston's better than Temple, but they might be the worst team in the Big 12. We'll see. But they're certainly not known for their defense or their defensive front. So I think it's alarming, even if even those twos and maybe a mixture of threes, when your backups at OU should be better than the starters at Temple and even Houston in year one of a rebuild under Willie Fritz. And I think that's the part that's a little scary is, okay, yeah, we all understand that maybe this looks a lot easier with your ones out there. That's kind of we all can wrap our minds around that. But at the same time, OU's twos should be better than Houston's ones.
So that leads me to this. What's next for the offense? I mean, is it as simple as just guys getting healthy? Or do you think that it goes further on, guys just getting healthy and maybe like schemes and stuff like that?
I mean, I would guess it's going to get better because I would hope for the Sooners' sake that Houston game was rock bottom for the offense. I wasn't super high on OU going into the year, and that was less to do with OU and more to do with the schedule.
Yeah.
But I picked them to go 7-5, 3-5 in the SEC. I mean, I probably would stick with that, but the defensive front, Tennessee's defense looks a lot better than I thought it would be. I thought Tennessee was going to be um, almost like LSU from last year, where they've got this elite offense, but they can't stop anybody. Well, they've got some players on the defensive side of the ball, so I think that could be kind of a rude awakening. Maybe OU passes that test, but then it only gets tougher with some of the defensive fronts you're going to see. So I think it really does all start with the offensive line. Sure, Jackson Arnold hasn't been great, but I think that, even though he was a 5-star kid, expectations weren't like through the roof. Like no one thought he was going to win the Heisman this year. Everyone thought, this offensive line might, it's probably not up to snuff with what OU and Bill Beatonbow usually throws out there. And that's reared its head probably sooner than most of us thought it would.
Yeah, Tennessee's front seven. I was watching a little bit of that NC State game. That front seven's vicious, and I was looking into them a little bit more on Sunday, and they got like 2 first-round draft picks. They have like a defensive end that's going to be a first-round draft pick. So it's one of those things. We'll talk about OSU in a second, but it's definitely one of those things where OU, and I think even to an extent OSU would both love to have a bye week before heading in to the conference play. But my main question is: so you had Brent Venables and OU going 7-5 this year. I was more like the 8-4. I was 8-3 going into the LSU game, and then we'll see what happens, in that game. So 8-4, 9-3. Let's say OU does go 6-6, or even worse, and doesn't even make a bowl game this year. How Brent Venables is not going to get fired, but how short does that leash get?
I think pretty short. I think, and Joe Castiglione is far from reactionary. I mean, some ADs just get super impatient real quick. And OU has a rabid fan base. We all know that. But it's not an athletic program where like the donors and the boosters really get involved and try to throw their weight around. So it's pretty stable. So I'm with you. I don't see any scenario in which Brent Venables gets fired after this season, and I think it's unlikely he gets fired after next season. However, if they rattle off a 6-6 and the offense kind of looks like a mess and they're still recruiting well and he's turned things around on the defensive side, I mean, I think they go into next season with an immense amount of pressure. There's going to be pressure either way, but I think that could be a make or break year for Brent Venables. Just because it's so funny in sort of a dark way, I guess, if you're an OU fan, that this is the inverse of the problems that the Sooners had under Lincoln Riley, where they had this elite offense and a defense that couldn't stop anybody. They might have an elite defense, but if, whether it's Littrell or Jackson Arnold or the offensive line, the offensive staff as a whole, if they, can't prop up that offense, then who cares if your defense looks like that? So, Brent Venables obviously had kind of a 1-year grace period. First year was awful. Second year was good, albeit against an extremely weak schedule. I think 7-5, 8-4 would definitely be passable. I would say 8-4 would be pretty good. But anything less than that, people are going to be restless going into next year.
Yeah, for sure. And I'm assuming there's like 85,000 OU fans over there last week that think that they lost that game. Anyways, so you mentioned the defense potentially being elite. Do you think that the defense is the real deal? Because I mean, last year we saw them start off so strong, and that kind of tapered off towards the back half of the season, where it just looked like guys were tired or worn out, whatever it might be. So do you think that this defense for Oklahoma is the real deal this year?
Well, I don't know if it's a top 5 or a top 10 defense in the country, real deal, but I think it's a breath of fresh air from what we've been used to around here. They look organized on that side of the ball. The depth issues we're talking about on offense don't really exist on the defensive side. I mean, they hardly have enough time to rotate in all the guys they want. They've brought in reinforcements on the D line with Jaden Jackson is a freshman, Dominic Williams through the portal. That's the area that OU, I feel like, has lagged behind compared to other SEC teams. Obviously, you've got an elite linebacking crew and you've got a veteran secondary. So I really do think this defense is good enough to keep OU in a lot of games. And I guess if you want to look at the glass half full, the defense is good enough to where the offense doesn't have to be great. The
Yeah.
offense just has to be passable. It just has to be average because the defense is good enough to win you some football games.
Yeah,
real quick, T-Bag. Is there been any word on Gentry Williams? I mean, because he's played sparingly the last couple of games.
Yeah, they said he's still working through things, but nothing super definitive on him. That's kind of been a hazy situation.
Going back to what you're just saying about the offense, it's just kind of going to be passable. It's one of those things to me. If you're to tell me from game 3 to game 12, so the next 10 games coming up, if they average 25.8 points a game or something, then I would say OU could very well go 7-3, 6-4 in that stretch. That's just where the offense needs to get to. But it's just a matter of if they can get it to that, because like you said, we've all been saying, it's not like Houston's some gauntlet on defense, and they got it shut out in the second half outside of the safety, which was obviously the defense that did that. But all right, OU, the beating's done for now, unless Preston has any more OU questions. We can move on.
I'm done.
We move on to the OSU side of things. So I've got kind of a bigger picture question here that I went to Oklahoma State, and I got a lot of buddies, who've been asking this question, and it's interesting to think about, because with conference realignment and everything we've seen, and just how everyone's saying OSU needs to take order in the Big 12, they need to become the new king, which I don't think they can necessarily get there, because I think everyone in the Big 12's on fairly equal footing. There's no OU Texas that's just way up here compared to everyone else.
Mm-hmm.
And I've been asked this a few times from different people, is they have a theory that outside of OU and Texas, and even Texas weren't really the biggest games of the world, except for a couple of years, because Texas just hasn't been that good over the last 15 years. Outside of really bedlam games, is the Utah game one of the bigger conference games Oklahoma State has played in under Mike Gundy?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard for me to say that, because obviously there have been high stakes bedlam games, and OSU has really performed well against Texas, and I think for the most part of the last decade has been the second best team in the Big 12 behind OU and ahead of Texas. But this Utah game is, to me, it makes perfect sense that it's the first game in this new look Big 12, because it's like a tone setting game for which of these two programs might seize the early control of being kind of the face of the conference. I wrote about this before the season, but talking to Mike Gundy about that concept of, with OU and Texas gone, can OSU become that team in this conference? And I'm with you. I think that, more times than not, they could be, but I don't think we're going to see any sort of domination like we saw from OU, just because the playing field is leveled out. But Utah and OSU, I think, are the two best programs in the conference right now. And then you look at the week after that at Kansas State, that's another huge one. So you've got two kind of tone setting games. And I just love the Utah matchup for multiple reasons. The programs and the head coaches, who are, two of the three longest tenured head coaches in college football. Kyle Whittingham is the face of Utah football. Mike Gundy is OSU football. And these two guys going against each other in the first week of conference play. I'm really looking forward to that.
Is there anything to worry about from the Arkansas game? Obviously, that was kind of one of those games where you just watch and it's like an instant classic, where it looks like Arkansas is just going to blow them out of the water in the first half. Oklahoma State, really, I mean, I would say the first 3.5 quarters or so just didn't show up, it seemed like, and then turned it on there towards the end of the game. So is there anything to worry about it in terms of either offense or defense going forward after that Arkansas game?
Well, I mean, where do we begin? I think there's a lot of things to be worried about. It's we're talking here on Wednesday night, and I'm still trying to figure out how OSU won that game.
Yeah.
And Mike Gundy talks about culture. That stuff is real. Arkansas found several ways to lose that game through penalties and boneheaded turnovers and everything like that. So credit OSU for winning the game. But I I don't want to overreact to that one game, but OSU's defense has so much experience that just the wide open holes Arkansas was running through. I was trying to figure out what's going on there with the defensive front. And we know they have an absolute superstar at linebacker and Nick Martin, and missing Colin Oliver. It's just a huge loss to that defense. That can't be overstated. So I was concerned with how the Cowboys couldn't stop the run against Arkansas. And once that Arkansas quarterback got out of the pocket, first off, he was really impressive on the run. But they had trouble containing him there. And then on the other side of the ball, speaking of veterans, their offensive line average age is like 23.4 or something. It's nuts. It's like a NFL aged offensive line, and the running game hasn't gotten going. I think in regulation, Ollie Gordon had 9 carries for 19 yards. So I'm not sure what's not clicking with OSU's run game. I'm not super concerned about it long term because we know who Ollie Gordon is, and we've seen that offensive line really have success. We just haven't seen it yet. But I guess I'm more concerned on the defensive side of things for OSU.
Yeah, for me, it's kind of like, the South Dakota State game, I guess maybe put that to the side because that was a really solid win. Now, there was obviously, some big chunk plays. Great. Yeah, there was some big chunk plays. There was times where the offensive line wasn't run blocking well and stuff. But to the Arkansas game, it really just kind of reminded me of the first 3 or 4 weeks last season, except this time OSU found a way to win the game. Like you said, somehow, some way, I think all of us are still trying to figure out, what happened. I was inside the stadium on Saturday, and I mean, everyone was just, just like depressed at halftime. Like the season's not going to be what we thought. And then all of a sudden it just completely kind of turns around the second half. But yes, for me, I think the defense is a big problem. But one problem I have, and I've been really critical of this guy, and probably at times unfairly, is Casey Dunn. He's been the offense coordinator. This is his 5th season now as offense coordinator. And it seems like it always has to take him to halftime to figure out what the defense is doing. And I don't know if it's Mike Gundy coming in and giving him ideas and stuff. But, for example, Ollie Gordon in the run game right now isn't perfect. It's running up the middle, and that's just not working. But whenever they give the ball to Ollie on the outside, it seems like Ollie is – it seems like we know Ollie's great at making guys miss and breaking tackles. So kind of what are your thoughts on just kind of like the play calling in general from Dunn this season? Because to me, it can get really frustrating at times because it seems like it's almost the same thing year in and year out, where it's like first half isn't great, second half they come out and everything seems to be clicking again.
Yeah, it's obviously we always nitpick offensive coordinators, especially, but I think Mike Gundy was pretty straightforward after that game that he did not love the offensive game plan and did not love the job the coaches did in the lead up to that game. And I do think they just, the game flow forced them to open things up more in the second half. But when that happened, the Cowboys just seemed to play so much more loose. And yeah, it was uncreative, I think, and like too conservative in the first half, especially as Arkansas had all the momentum. Gundy said they wish they would have gone to the passing game more early on. And I really like OSU's group of receivers. I think Stribling could be a star. Obviously, we know what Presley can do. Owens makes some big time catches. And I don't know. I thought you might be right about Dunn in the first half. I thought in the second half, some of it was like gimmicky, but like the flea flicker was outstanding. Both of the 2-point conversion plays, I thought were really creative the way they drew those up. But yeah, just kind of, it was too vanilla early on, I thought.
Well, I'd be remiss, Joe, if we had you on and we didn't talk a little bit about the Oklahoma City Thunder, as media days are, 2 weeks away at this point, maybe even less than that. I need to look at a calendar, but just a couple of questions here on the Thunder. Who will be more important for the Thunder this season, Hartenstein or Caruso?
I'm going to say Hartenstein. I think the easy answers both are going to be important,
Yeah.
but Caruso, there's more of that player type on the roster with Lou Dort and Cason Wallace. You can never have enough, wing defenders, so he's going to help take away some ball handling duties. And last year was his best 3-point shooting season. Hartenstein, though, I think the gap between Hartenstein as your backup center and Jay Will as your backup center is bigger than, Caruso and Dort and Cason Wallace. The difference in those guys. I think Hartenstein, he's an elite defender and he's an elite rebounder. And that rebounding, especially, we all know how much we talked about that and the Thunder's rebounding woes. I think he's going to help clean that up. He's going to give the Thunder just a bigger body down in the post and a guy who's versatile enough to be the only center on the court and to be a center next to Chet Holmgren in a double big lineup. I'm still under the impression that Hartenstein's going to come off the bench to begin the season and act more as a second team center than a starter who's playing next to Chet. I think so much of Chet's value is tied to him being a center, and I think that fits more the way they want to play offensively. But Hartenstein just gives you more options in certain matchups to play a double big lineup. And really the underrated part about his game, he's a really good passer. Like we've seen Jay Will operate out of the high post and make some pretty good plays. I think you're going to see Hartenstein making some excellent passes out of the high post. The Thunder is such a good cutting team. He's going to be able to facilitate from there. So I really like what Hartenstein gives them because there's really no other guy like him on the roster.
So I hate asking this question because I think, one, it makes people mad around here because they love the guy so much. But with the addition of Alex Caruso, and everything you just said, if the Thunder are, sitting in February before the deadline and, they think they can make a move that's going to put them over the top. They're like, if we make this move, we stay healthy, we're winning the West. Do you think that there's a world where Lou Dort can get traded?
I knew you were going there. You're going to get us all in trouble. Sure, there's a world. I mean, it's a very tradable salary.
Yeah.
And if let's just get crazy. If Kevin Durant becomes available or some superstar who they're like, yeah, it's like automatic to where they increase your championship odds by a meaningful percentage, well, then sure, you might have to make that decision. However, I would say it's like less than a 5% chance that Dort is moved. I think, even though Caruso might be, I think it's kind of a wash between them defensively. I know Caruso's made all defensive teams and Dort hasn't. Caruso is the better offensive player, the better shooter, but I'm not a guy who gets caught up in the whole just like mindset culture type thing. But like the way the Thunder talks about Lou Dort is different than they talk about pretty much any guy on what he kind of brings to the team and him being the example of the way they want everyone else to play and just going a million miles an hour at all times and always taking on the toughest assignment. And I think the best defense, no pun intended, for Lou Dort is looking at the playoffs, and he just totally took Brandon Ingram out of the whole series in that Pelicans win. In the second round, he guards Doncic, and at times Kyrie is as good as you can guard, those guys. I mean, Luka Doncic last season before last now, called Dort a top 3 defender. And, if I'm Lou Dort and his agent, next time he's up for an extension, I just print that Doncic quote and bring it into Presti's office or whoever else he's meeting with at the time, because it's so like basketball is so sophisticated with the numbers we have and the metrics we have. We still struggle at times to like quantify defensive value. But to me, part of it is just like, if maybe the best offensive player in the world, Luka Doncic, is saying this guy is one of the 3 best at stopping me and making it hard for me to do what I do, that's probably a guy I'd want to keep around. But as far as the contract goes, definitely tradable. I think this doesn't matter as much as some fans might think, but he's also really good friends with Shea, and I think Shea, wants to keep his Canadian buddy around.
Yeah.
They're also the two guys that have been kind of bridging one era to the next, and as far as the longest tenured guy, so there's some emotional attachments as well. I think the city might have an uprising if Lou Dort is gone.
Yeah, I mean that's everything you just said. I completely agree with, because I think it kind of goes, from the outside fan sometimes, that they don't put into consideration, what he means to that locker room, what he means to the organization, and then like you said too, you have a superstar, you have a top 5 player in the league in Shea Gilgeous-Alexander, and that's one of his best friends in the world.
Mm-hmm.
That would have to get approved through Shea, and I don't know if Shea would ever. I mean, he might. I mean, obviously we don't know what goes on behind closed doors all the time, but yeah, that's something where I think a lot of people don't put in consideration is how good his friends he is with Shea, and you don't want to make that guy mad.
Yeah, I wrote this story a couple of years ago, but Lou Dort, obviously he goes undrafted. He's on a 2-way contract. He's not quite ready to buy a house, and he lived with Shea his whole first year. I mean, they were basically roommates. And they were friends before that, but I think they got closer, and now as two of the longtime starters on this team, you probably wouldn't want to break them up.
For sure. Well, Joe, thank you so much for joining us. Hopefully we'll see you at Media Days here in a couple of weeks there in Oklahoma City, but we really appreciate you joining us tonight for a couple of minutes. That's Joe Mussatto of the Oklahoman. What's your it's just at Joe Mussatto on X, right?
Yeah, at Joe_Mussatto, and can find all of my work at Oklahoman.com.
Awesome. Well, we really appreciate it, man. Thank you so much.